Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast sponsored by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Jim Tavernelli. He is the president and COO of KLH Engineers, a traditional MEP engineering consulting firm in the AEC industry. Jim has led KLH's reinvention into an innovation-centric practice by executing its technical strategy, which has fundamentally changed the way KLH views and completes its work. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you for the introduction, Todd.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how'd you get into the construction industry to begin with?
Well, I would say it was by chance. I graduated with an electrical engineering degree in 2000, December 2000, and I moved to the Cincinnati, Ohio region. I'm originally from Northeast Ohio in Cleveland, and frankly, I needed a job. So I carpet bombed the area with cover letters and resumes, and back then, we didn't have LinkedIn. I think at best, we were still dealing with dial-up internet, so it was a real treat. I lived with I moved down here for a girl that I ended up marrying, but
It worked out well.
it worked out. But oddly, Todd, I'm with the company. This is my first and only job, so I'm still with the company that gave me my first opportunity.
Nice. That's a rarity in today's
And
world.
it is. And next March, I celebrate my 20th year.
Congrats. That's amazing.
It's been a good ride. I feel
Very
very
cool.
fortunate.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation and diving into some different mindset transitions and all that stuff. We first got introduced to each other, though, for audience sake, by Amy Marks, and you then were gracious enough to come on a MEP Mastermind event and be a thought leader and moderator, unpacking all things industrialized construction. So I want to kind of start there on how do you define industrialized construction?
Well, that was a good event, the MEP Masterminds. We continue to shine a spotlight on what exactly IC is and what it means to the industry. Amy has been a huge proponent and a personality, very intentional on Autodesk's part to, push industrialized construction. I believe in the same things, but frankly, when I think IC, I think flow of data, um, you know, flow of information within the construction value stream, simultaneous, instantaneous, so that decisions can be made from, one, as we call them, silos to the next. The title of your podcast is very fitting in this regard, because the fragmentation that exists in our industry within that value stream, IC represents a strategy in which those silos become more blended together and streamlined in a way that convergence and collaboration becomes much more possible. So IC forces that type of behavior. It closes those gaps. It eliminates breakdowns and bottlenecks and interruptions in workflow. It's very popular these days to think of IC in terms of productization, which is immensely critical and center to that philosophy. But it's often overlooked at the trade and GC level. And it's awesome to see the continued efforts of the subject matter experts push this concept through the industry. I think at the trade and GC level, it's about material and process, in the way that there's an element of standardization that's present within the way that we work, and that elevated style of thinking allows that standardization to naturally transition to repeatable. It makes repeatable tasks scalable. Sure. in a real powerful and significant way.
Yeah. Where do you think we really are, though, adoption-wise, industry-wide, with really rolling out industrialized construction as you just laid out?
If I were to give you my first blush reaction to it, I would say there's people out there doing it. If you want me to put it in a percentage context, I would say we're below 20% for sure.
Yeah.
There's still too many companies and professionals in the industry that are frankly relying on things that worked 20 years ago. And perhaps there are very good reasons why they're not looking forward. Perhaps they're busy. Perhaps their backlog is full. The proverbial they're fat, dumb, and happy, and don't care to look forward.
Right.
Maybe it's scaring them, the thought of the disruption of bringing in and institutionalizing change, both culturally and within workflow and process within the organization. Um, but I would say it's below 20% for sure.
Mhm. Do you think that there's an education component to this, that people, they may have heard of industrialized construction, and but they don't fully know what it means, or they've created their own definition, and people aren't really agreeing on the one set, this is what it means, this is what it is?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's all about education. I mean, to be totally candid, I'm ushering in education within my own organization at KLH on, like, hey folks, this is something you need to become more familiar with as we seek outside partnerships to enable our partners to productize, to
Mhm.
leverage the strategies associated with IC. Um, there's an immense educational component to it that can't be understated.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I mentioned in the intro is that at KLH, you guys have really transitioned from that, or to an innovation-centric company, and have technology at the forefront. First off, why'd you guys decide to make that shift to a technology-first approach? And then what's that transition been like?
It's a very long story, Todd. I'm going to spare you some of the emotional details. Um, but the things I just referenced about relying on things that worked in the past, that describes KLH 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Things were going well. Um, but for whatever reason, we just weren't innovating to be better. We were I would say we were pretty complacent, quite frankly. So, what pushed that is we had this offsite, this infamous offsite retreat with our technical leaders in the firm to ask ourselves some pretty basic questions.
Mhm.
Um, Questions like, as a third generation owner, we are not family owned, but as a third generation owner of the company, there's a statistic out there that a third of all companies going through a third generational shift don't make it, or I'm sorry,
Mhm.
come out alive. So
Mhm.
so 2/3 don't make it.
Mhm.
And, um, one of our senior shareholders asked us, "Are you guys the generation that's going to kill this business?" Because we were not lifting up, we weren't step functioning the way our behavior, our thought process in how are we leading the company to remain relevant tomorrow, let alone, 20 years from now? Am I giving myself a chance to continue my career in this field?
Yeah.
And ultimately, what is my legacy? And that really woke us up.
Some good,
So
healthy pressure right there.
that's the emotional side of the conversation. But I mentioned it started with some basic questions like, is the world going to be more 2D or 3D in the future?
Mhm.
And of course, that's an obvious answer. It's going to be more 3D. And so that led to, then why in the world are we supporting two design platforms, that being AutoCAD, two-dimensional, and Revit, three-dimensional? And oh, by the
Mhm.
way, our proficiency in Revit at that time wasn't exactly cutting it. So answering that question, making a firm commitment that 100% of our organization was going to transition into 3D Revit. So we shifted and made that significant change over the course of about 18 months. So that was in August of 2016 when we made that decision. Some of the other questions were like, Is the world going to be more data driven or less data driven in the future? Again, a very obvious rhetorical type question. It's going to be more data driven. So that much more supplanting the reason why to shift into a BIM platform like Revit.
Hmm.
But yet, how are we leveraging data, calculations, decision-making criteria, historical performance data in a way that informs our future projects, not just for internal efficiency and for profitability, but for the sake of better outcomes to our customers? Um, so in that vein, some of the other questions that we asked ourselves, in terms of, within our company, within our spot in the industry, I'll touch on what that means externally outside KLH. But we asked who is the true consumer of our drawings? Because contractually, right, more often than not, it's not always, but more often than not, contractually, we're serving upstream to an architecture firm.
Hmm.
That's typically the contractual arrangement. Whereas the true consumer of our work are the contractors. So why are we not making it a um, more intentional focus on asking the right kinds of questions for them? What is it that's going to eliminate risk, reduce waste, increase efficiency in the procurement of materials, streamline, estimating and bidding, things like that. We just weren't considering those things back then.
Hmm.
How do you coordinate up and downstream, um, during a project? And that speaks to, currently we're utilizing email, and obviously there's other third-party platforms like Procore, but it isn't allowing that seamless transfer of data in a productive way. Um, we asked ourselves, how do engineers and architects roles in the industry change in the next 10 years? Said differently, and specifically for MEP engineers, um, we're serving the needs of a permit, and that doesn't add a whole lot of value. So knowing, with automation and the rise of technology in our space, quite frankly, we could be, subverted or usurped by some technology startup that is automated and embedded, a lot of the code driven types of process that we implement on our projects. If that happens, what is our value? Is it a stamp? Is it the fact that I'm registered in this state? And quite frankly, that doesn't have a lot of value.
Hmm.
Um, and then I mentioned, the question about more or less data. Um, so then when we look outside of our business, we asked, there are behaviors in our personal lives that we will not tolerate that occur every single day in our professional lives. So, for example, if Todd, you send me a text like, "Hey Jim, meet me at this bar," and you give me an address, right? What is the behavior, right? I hold my thumb on the address, it pops open Waze or whatever my default nav app is, and off
Yeah.
I'm going, right? It intuitively understands that I want directions.
Right.
I'm not, taking out a napkin, and I'm not writing down the address, and I'm not typing it into MapQuest and then hitting print. But yet in our professional lives, we're or we're populating calculations in a selection software or a load calculation software, and then we're manually populating that information into Excel or into some other selection software. It's a very disjointed process, right?
Sure.
It's that fragmented process that we're speaking of. Um,
And
and
people
it,
are proud of that process too. Like, oh, yeah, look at this. Look what we do.
but it leads to, it's not only wasteful, but it leads to really costly errors.
Sure.
When you implement, or when you think about human error, maybe you fat fingered something or you select the wrong model number. It just is. It's just very inefficient.
Yeah.
Um, we ask ourselves about the assembly line. Would a car manufacturer send a car up the manufacturing line twice, saying, by the time they get to the point where they're gonna put the doors on, they're like, oh, you know what? These doors are too expensive. Or the car's too expensive. We can't go forward. So let's go back to the beginning. Of course not. All of that is coordinated and figured out ahead of time. But yet in construction, we will go through design development, that's like 80% through the project, where there's been a lot of effort put into the project, only to realize at bidding that the owner can't afford the project.
Right.
So we go through this, classic value engineering exercise, which just it leads to more. It just leads to more waste. The last one here is the example that we like is, would you pay your friend with a check or with Venmo or PayPal, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, it speaks to, that seamless transfer of funds to a friend or a relative, whereas the way we're communicating with the industry is still largely very disjointed. Um, so that talks to the philosophy behind the why.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been an absolute wonderful transformation. It's been hard. It's been a very heavy lift. It's taken about 4 years to get to a point where we are now bringing that value to our external partners.
So you guys had this breakthrough at the retreat with leadership. How did you then come back and kind of sell it to everybody else in the company and get their buy-in? Because I would imagine without the buy-in of everybody else, the plan kind of falls apart.
Oh, without a doubt, Todd. I mean, the easy part was agreeing on what was next at that
Right.
offsite. The hard part was coming back to the office and be like, okay, now what? And in my role, um, that was really my job to begin that process. And frankly, I had to accept that I needed to change my own behavior. I needed to be fearless in terms of um, trying new things. How are we going to get our employees involved in fundamentally changing the way that we approach our projects?
Mhm.
And it's not a new method, but we utilize Kanban boards, right? The sticky notes that are so popular in so many companies. But I put it in the middle of the office. This is when we were still working together in an office space, by the
Yeah.
way.
What's that like?
Um, but I put it in the middle of the office intentionally so that visibility would be increased. And it started with about eight or so of us, and we would meet every single day at 2 to 2:30, and we had our swim lanes, and we would track different tickets. But even in the beginning, the early days of that process, it was this really awkwardness, be like, okay, what now? I just feel like we're just staring at each other,
Yeah.
and working through something that eventually enabled us to find our groove, start, hitting those iterative milestones in those sprints in an efficient way, and just constantly doing that with repetition and consistency, and promoting involvement. We launched this lunch and learn series internally, where every Thursday at noon we would buy everyone lunch in exchange for them coming in, and we would talk about the opportunities for us to be change agents, for us to influence the necessary change in construction. And some didn't believe, and that I think that's normal, but that started the process for us to get a higher level of engagement and enthusiasm and energy, all centered around this strategy, which you referenced it in my intro. We call it, affectionately, we call it the technical strategy. I know it's not a flashy name, but it's just that we're a technical company, and what is the strategy by which that we are reinventing ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that is just those are two examples of how we got that off the ground internally. But there were some skeptics associated with this, and there's
Well, I imagine.
a lot of investment made on new tools. I've heard some of your past podcasts, Todd, where you're talking about VR and AR. I mean, it was about
Mhm.
exploring all of those technologies, and so I wouldn't think twice. Just like, we're buying a HoloLens, we're buying a Oculus, we're buying, I don't care. Let's just play with it. Let's see if it has value. If it doesn't have value, I don't care, right? It's okay to backtrack. It's okay to spend those dollars if it means we're learning new information about what can or what might not work. And some saw that as, well, they're spending my bonus money, as
Right.
an example. And despite my best efforts to preach, why, and that this is all in the name of creating opportunities and creating more, projects and streams of revenue for the business. Some ended up, leaving, but I think of that as necessary turnover. Turnover is not fun by any means, but that was necessary turnover for us to ultimately get where we are today.
Yeah. Long term wise, what kind of impact did you see morale wise of the company going through this transition?
Um, it's had an incredible impact on culture. I mean, that's been like front and center in this entire tech strategy. Is if we're not nurturing culture, if we're not having the conversations with individuals that we feel that can contribute
Hmm.
in a meaningful way, the strategy is nothing, right? The whole culture eats strategy for lunch. I mean, it's
Right.
true, and that's been a core focus. Promoting involvement, as I suggested, those lunch and learns, promoting some of our employees say, listen, if you have a topic that you're passionate about, if you'd like to lead a lunch and learn, or if you want to get involved with some speaking engagement at a conference, I mean, we're going to support that. That's the type of characteristics and behavior that we desire.
Yeah.
And once we prove to the employees that we were serious about this and that wasn't some flash in the pan shiny object, that we were serious about, like that Revit, that commitment to Revit. 2 months in, we're still talking about, folks, we're getting into Revit. How are we progressing? Let's hear some feedback. It's like, okay, they're serious about this. And once they realized that this wasn't going away, I think that engagement, the enthusiasm, the buy-in and the energy from the culture just increased,
Yeah.
because they started to see, okay, wow, I can do this within this platform, or this is now making my job easier so that I can focus on the more creative side of my job. Um, it was all very important. It was an important part of that transformation for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would imagine too that it would really help create a more open and really trusting environment. Because if you don't have that space to feel free to come in and throw out a crazy innovative idea and see what works. If you don't have that trust with your teammates, it's not really going to work.
You're right. I can't underscore like the role of the leader as a preacher, as I call it. Being constantly visible, and that visibility is tested in COVID times.
Yeah.
But there was some concern that with all of this new adoption of technology, that hey, they're automating away my job,
Mm,
right? That was a big concern. Like, I'm a designer, they're trying to get rid of my role. And so preaching that we're seeing automation as an opportunity, not as a threat. I realize that that's cliched, but all again, it's to streamline the rather rudimentary or mundane parts of our job.
right.
Okay,
It enhances it so that you can focus on, as you said, that those more creative elements to the job.
the more consultative, like being more face to face with your customers,
Yeah.
like spending more time, given that we have budgets on our projects, spending more time on the more important decisions, where the big dollars are spent on a project, not on, laying out lights or laying out receptacles or light switches or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Allows you to focus on things that are more front, frankly.
Exactly. I mean, that's why we got in this business. It's for the creative side. It's for the the parts that are more fun. Um, and one last piece there. There was also some rumors and speculation that our goal was to become a software company, because during this transition we started to hire software developers, which I think makes us really unique as an MEP engineering firm. The
uh,
fact that we have 16 developers on staff, comprising roughly 20% of our staff now, I mean, is pretty miraculous. And so that investment in custom Revit tools, and I mean developing directly in the API, not utilizing Dynamo, not to disrespect Dynamo or anything like that, but with all of that investment in those types of activities and those types of employees, there was this I guess this concern that we were looking to become a software company, and that just isn't true. So getting out in front of that and I guess debunking those types of concerns was an important part of my job in the early days for sure.
Yeah. Any advice for people trying to make a similar mindset shift?
Yeah, my advice would be, have the guts to ask yourself those same types of philosophical questions. And, whether, regardless of whether you're busy right now, you're having success today, it doesn't mean that you're going to have success tomorrow. And that is even further compounded over the last 5 years. No, seeing the movement in construction. I mean, the number of times I'm hearing these types of terms and these types of presentations has exponentially increased since 2016.
Sure.
It's coming. It's coming like a freight train. And you mentioned Amy Marks earlier. I mean, she said it best, which I think is absolutely savage. She said, "It's no longer a journey, right? There's all these companies wanting to know, how do I get on the journey?
Yeah.
It's no longer a journey, it's a race. And if you don't know about the race, well, then you're not in it.
Yeah.
So
Sounds
don't
like Amy works.
so don't wait.
Yeah.
Be willing to spend those dollars, invest in your employees, invest in culture, and have the guts to try new things, knowing that it might feel silly and awkward and clunky at the beginning, but with that consistency and that commitment comes comes I think just this ritualistic type of if it's a huddle or if it's a meeting or if it's a lunch and learn, it just becomes part of what we do, right?
Sure.
It's part of the cultural fabric. Just have the guts to kind of look out and ask yourself those tough kind of questions.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, if you're not doing it, there's one of your competitors is out there doing it. And by the time you wake up and you start the race, they're going to be light years ahead of you.
To that point, Todd, you're absolutely right. In the early days, as we were having small breakthroughs, and you know different companies were asking us about it, I had this real hair up my rear about like hiding it, right? Not willing to share it because it might get stolen or anything.
Mhm.
And that's indicative of kind of what's wrong in our industry right now, is right the unwillingness to kind of share workflows, or you said it earlier, the trust that comes with that.
Yeah.
And we're not going to win, or we're not going to advance if I'm not willing to share innovation in a way that I think promotes a win-win scenario or promotes a partnership. So that even for myself, there's been incredible growth in understanding how to behave. But also, to the point you made, is that what I'm showing now, we're working on version 6.
Right.
Okay, this is version 2. And even if they want to replicate it, good luck, right? The cultural transformation is a big part of that. And not to mention the code and the technical uh, complexity of the code is a compounding factor as well.
Yeah. There's years of prep work to get to the starting line in this race. You got to start sooner or later. So you guys are really trying to cross vertical lines in the industry. How do you make it that dividing line between GC and MEP maybe a little less combative?
um okay, so the reason I love this question is it like hits right at the heart of the human condition, um which inherently I think human beings uh, are mired in a belief system that you need to lose in order for me to win.
Yeah.
Um, and if we just all recognize that the world will be a better place when we strive for win-win scenarios, I realize that I'm getting a little deep here, but if we're not capable or willing to go into the depth of thought that allows those types of relationships, then we're never gonna realize the types of change that we desire. Um, as I think about this, there are certainly, I hear of trades that love working for GCs. So there are examples of that, and it's generally the GCs that value what the sub brings to the table. That um, they're not withholding payments, they're not squeezing the sub on schedule. Um, they're valuing what they're doing on site, they're relinquishing control, and they're being more collaborative rather than, how do I mitigate my risk, how do I push schedule or scope or whatever onto the sub. That'll show up, like for an example where a sub will show up with their crew, to install whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. And yet that wall hasn't even been sheeted in yet. Right.
Mhm.
And so, like, what WTF, I got my crew here, and like, yeah, I'm sorry, you're going to have to, come back next week. The
Right.
communication just isn't there. Um, and that would be an example of, why there is a divide. But I think when we come together and we seek win-win scenarios, is when we're going to start to recognize the change that we desire. There will be less confrontation and less combativeness when there's greater collaboration.
Yeah.
And not to mention, this is mimicked in other areas of the industry. I think of the architect to engineer, or the engineer to sub. Right, there is conflict that exists there. And being an MEP engineer, I'm very familiar with how the trades feel about MEP engineers. They frankly, they just don't like them, and that they're sick of dealing with them. I mentioned that you're not coordinating our drawings. We're pushing incomplete drawing packages to them. They're not constructible. um, and when there is an issue, they submit an RFI to us, and we wait 3 weeks to respond to that RFI with, like, hey, it's in the drawings. They just view us as this arrogant sort of necessary evil because we have a stamp, and that's the current paradigm that we live in. But
Mhm.
we're seeing, more and more a pattern where electrical contractors, mechanical contractors are building their own in-house engineering competency because they're just tired of dealing with us. We're costing them dollars. Um, so, the way we're trying to increase that collaboration is by committing, through that commitment to Revit, we're committing to pushing as much content into our models, into our designs, such that it is fully coordinated. We're trying to eliminate all of our generic details in those, massive phone book size specification books that are littered with what we call landmines and gotchas.
Yeah.
Um, so we're just trying to make things easier and provide more tangible value to our contractor partners, and it's starting to take root. There are still some that aren't buying it, but with persistence, we're gonna eventually get to a place where we're putting our money where our mouth is, and it's already happening to
Yeah.
a significant degree.
Yeah. I love that, of the how can you bring value to those who you're working with. And I think in large part that really comes from trying to understand their perspective and where they're coming from, because they may be doing something a certain way that makes no sense to you, but it makes sense in their workflow. And if you kind of seek to understand their perspective on it, you don't have to agree with it. You might still think it's a stupid thing to put in there, but you can at least kind of go, all right, I see why they do it. Now I can come at it this way. This is where I'm coming. I can bring a value in this way and enhance that. And so it's always less combative when you know who the person is and you see that as a person, not just
Frankly, we weren't in a position to disagree with it, Todd. I mean, we were, quote unquote, behaving badly, and we had the opportunity to go across the country and speak to a variety of contractor peer groups. And this is, a very close network of electrical contractors from all around the country coming together, sharing best practices, how are they adopting lean principles, how are they kitting, how are they prefabbing, financial strategies, et cetera. And fortunately, we were able to get on on the circuit, the agenda,
Mhm.
to present sort of our approach, our contractor first approach. But it started with, how do we at least create an environment where they're willing to listen to us?
Mhm.
And so it started with, tell me, hit me, like, how do you feel about MEP types? I'm not just talking about KLH. I'm talking about the A&E side in general. And it was brutal. I mean, they're just tired of dealing with this. And the most soul crushing thing that I learned about it all is that we work on the design side, engineer. We work tirelessly and effortless, or in putting that blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak, into our projects,
Yeah.
and we deliver to them. Yeah, it'll go in for permit, but you know what they do with our drawings? They throw them in the trash. And they recreate the model themselves because they have that much little confidence in
Yeah.
what we are delivering to them from a coordination standpoint, constructability. Is it detailed? Um, all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's like, why in that world are we doing this? If
Yeah.
they're throwing
Demoralizing.
if they're throwing away our quote unquote product. Yeah, we are a service-based company, but our designs, our models, our drawings are the products of our services. And to learn that, I mean, that was like a punch to the gut. We're like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, and that was, I was able to take that back to the company, share what we had learned, and it put some, fuel behind, this is why we are going in this direction.
Yeah. Well, what kind of battle for relevancy then do you think that the MEP trades are facing moving forward?
So I'm going to go on both sides of the labor spectrum here for a
Uh-huh.
moment. It's been well documented that there's a shortage of skilled labor in our industry, um, specifically for the trades. And as long as high schools continue to push, students into colleges, and colleges are trying to push their graduates into white collar, quote unquote white collar jobs, that is always going to be, that problem's going to exist. But on the other side of the spectrum, I look at it as, um, you know, productization, right? If, let's say, contractors begin to understand the benefits and the scalability of productization, taking something repeatable, some installation, and then scaling it to a point where they've become a manufacturer themselves, where they're shipping, excuse me, assemblies or kits to project sites that where they're not the installing contractor. Or
Mhm.
you could take a manufacturer like Train, or Carrier, or whatever, and let's say um, they start to productize their current equipment that much further, to the point where installation becomes so simplified that skilled labor isn't necessary. You could start to see the GC self-perform that scope. And it sort of boxes out, to use a basketball term, the subs from competing in that space.
Mhm.
And it gets right back to the heart of this conversation about continuing to evolve forward and keeping your eyes open, and what are the trends in the industry, what new tech is becoming available, shared practices, what are others doing in this space, and not casting it off as, yeah, that'll never take root. We've all heard the oh, what's the camera manufacturer? I'm blanking on it at the moment.
Kodak?
Kodak, yes, the Kodak example, the BlackBerry example, and I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a number of 'em. Don't become that, right?
Right.
Be willing to listen to what's going on in the industry, and invest in perhaps a position in your organization where they're doing just that. Like, we have an individual at KLH. They face a real, I think, a real risk, just like, as I mentioned, engineers. They face a real risk of seeing their place in the value stream be commoditized and, frankly, eliminated if you don't rise up and start delivering a greater value.
Mhm.
And those opportunities exist in, you know adopting all those types of agile and lean principles, like how are we kitting and how are we simplifying our own designs on our own projects. And once you find some success in that, the opportunities for scaling that become greater.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, Jim, what do you think is the most exciting part of construction right now for you?
There's a few things, and selfishly, I'm gonna liken it or relate it to some things that we have going on at KLH. Um, I see data consulting is an emerging trend that's going to be really important in our industry. This came up earlier in our discussion, Todd, where you asked me, what percentage of the industry is starting to trend in that direction, and I said at most 20%. And the reason I said that figure is you still have too many companies in our industry that are, as I stated, relying on things that worked in the past. And so the revelation of what is known as a BIM execution plan has become increasingly more prevalent in projects for predominantly serial builders, like universities or healthcare institutions.
Mhm.
But all that becomes is a document that gets put on the shelf. The design team's like, yeah, we can do BIM, in their response, and it doesn't happen. And so the owner is provided the same old stuff. And so we realized through discussions with a large healthcare institution, we started pitching this idea of a data consultant. And what that means is shepherding the design team and the contractors, the installation team, through a process that makes the model the single source of truth,
Mm.
where owner criteria, owner standards, and I'm not just talking about level of detail and level of design. I'm talking about manufacturing tech, all the different parameters associated with wire, with devices, with circuits, with rooms and areas. All of that is embedded in the model in a way that can be QC'd and can be verified and audited by an owner rep or by us as the owner's rep on the data side. So
Mhm.
pushing this service through has started to, or not pushing, but the creation of this service that we developed called Levcon Analytics has allowed us to differentiate ourselves. Just another point where we are behaving differently than a traditional engineering firm, and it's a strategy that, quite frankly, creates a scenario where our competitors are customers. We can administer this service, whether we're the engineer of record or not.
Mm.
And it's been, a wonderful, I think, a wonderful, experiment that is eventually like the beauty, like any evolution, like just how amazing it is to watch things evolve over time. And this is a great example of that.
Yeah, very nice.
I see the need for um, contractors and designers to come together in a more collaborative way to integrate workflows, to integrate processes, things like that. Um, I also, I like what's happening in the IC space. There seems to be a need to develop some type of, um, call it marketplace to enable the types of, um, products, whether it's coming from a contractor or coming from a manufacturer. So those are some of the trends that I get really excited about.
Mhm.
Um, I see the walls coming down between designers and contractors, and helping one another become more streamlined in a way that, say, like that single source of truth, right? The digital twin. Those are buzzwords in the industry, but there is a race to develop that kind of competency where you're not recreating things, and it allows a contractor to quickly extract the bill of material, as an example, dump it into their, their estimating software, and immediately come out with a much more precise number rather than some contingency laden bid for a project, right? It increases their competitiveness on a project that they're competing for.
Mhm.
I think it eliminates risk. And if we're willing to, put our money where our mouth is, there's opportunities to introduce maybe even incentives to different contracts to our proposals for our projects. And what I mean by that is, like an example, we're promoting this fully coordinated model, and the owner in this case, which was a higher ed client, bought into the whole idea, and we said, listen, here's what we want you to do. We want you to allocate the money that you would otherwise, put in your bid for coordination. And if we do what we say we do, we streamline to the point where you're spending a fraction of those dollars. Owner, you get the opportunity to do what you choose with that money. If you want to spend it on some additional tech for your new building, or hey, if you want to bonus it out to the team for performing, living up to the contract, so to speak, that option exists too.
Yeah.
So, introducing incentive-based contracts, I think is an innovative way to approach projects.
Yeah. Nice. Well, how do people get a hold of you and find out more about what you guys are doing at KLH?
You can visit our website at klhengrs.com, or you can message me, or you can call me anytime. My number is 859-462-1878. Text, call, email me anytime. We're just, we're not professing to have the answer. I think this is probably an appropriate way to end it. We're out there promoting collaboration. We're seeking like-minded partners to come together to build trust, and to start sharing, methods and processes, workflows in a way that ultimately, I think, yields the types of outcomes that we all desire.
Yeah.
You know, uh, we have this, vision, or this mission, I should say, to bring joy to construction. Because frankly, it's been joyless for the past 10 years. And, when we lead with that, um, you know, people generally tend to lean in and be like, interesting. Well, let me hear more. And
Yeah.
just with some authentic type dialogue, I think the trust increases, and the willingness to listen also increases.
Absolutely. Love that. So final question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation means to me, it's a matter of life or death. Um, I think in the early days of innovation, you can spend some time on, you know, and this is where you gain momentum, right? Like eliminating clicks, for example. All right, or minimizing clicks in a process, in my design. That's a great place to start. And what will eventually happen is it'll start to snowball in a way. And I think once you get to a point, there is the law of diminishing returns that any company will experience when you get to that point. It's like, what is the next thing?
Yeah.
How do we apply our innovation in a more meaningful way that that potentially adds value for the company? Um, and it's been told to me that it is an innovation if someone's not willing to pay for it. But I don't think you can adopt that philosophy in the earlier days, but you will eventually get to a point. But to answer your question in a soundbite, I think innovation means relevancy.
Mm. Awesome. Oh, Jim, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. This was great.
It's been a pleasure, Todd. I've enjoyed it as well, and hope everyone's found some value in this.
Yeah, absolutely.